So when we were talking about the Dior dress before, we were talking about this idea of using history to create something forward-thinking, and that idea of, and specifically of Versailles, which was interestingly echoed in what Karl did at Chanel.
Extraordinary. I mean, this is fashion where there is this same response articulated in a different way, because the Chanel collection, the couture, is very different from what Raf did at Dior, and yet there again we have the influence of Versailles, this time taking the Baroque ornamentation and slashing it or contrasting it or merging it or counterpointing it to specifically Corbusier, which then fed into the concrete and the concrete embroideries, which he'd found somebody who'd been developing concrete, making these like sequins and rectangular sequins that were soft and light and that could be suspended almost to make little, well, they made concrete little bolero jackets and things like that, and they were incorporated into clothes as embroideries, everything. And it was also a very lyrical show, because I think that's something, there was the reality, there was the history, there was what was forward-looking, there's an embrace of actually the materials of our time that are most responsive and real and truthful, like concrete or tinsel or filament or neoprene, exactly. So it was really exciting, a really beautiful show. I
think it's interesting to talk about the concrete as well, because for me, the sort of magical thing about couture is that it takes fabric and makes it into something amazing. And in this case, taking something so ordinary, everyday, something that's under everybody's feet, and transforming it into this kind of incredible thing. It's easy to sort of cover a dress in diamonds and make it look amazing, but
he used do it in concrete. And each of the embroiderers, the different houses that worked, whether it's Lesage or Montex or Urel, they were all working with concrete within their own way of embroidering. And it's interesting that there are these different, it's like using every instrumentalist in your orchestra to make this extraordinary sound.
I think as well there's that, I mean, with Le Corbusier there is that link to Chanel. I wrote something about Louis XIV being kind of an architect of France in a sort of statewide sense, and then Le Corbusier being an architect of France in an architectural sense, and then Chanel is an architect of French style. She is one of those great architects of French style. Yeah. So it was interesting to place her in that continuum, and also the continuum of the idea of, you know, using humble materials like jersey, like you know, poor furs, putting fur on the inside of jackets, using
or white cotton collars.
Exactly.
Taking away all the frill, the corset, the ooh la la.
Yeah, taking away kind of, and also taking
tweed,
away the couture.
Logical menswear, you know, the logic of menswear she then brought into fashion, which I think is so, it's graceful and real and truthful and beautiful.
I mean, we've called it on Show Studio, we've called this shoot Sans Couture, which was something that came from something that you said to me. But I think in a sense it is, I mean, with this concrete, it is like taking away what people think of couture meaning.
Yeah, meaning and spangled, incredibly bejeweled.
Well, when we're next to an incredibly bejeweled dress, it's kind of, it's very couture. But also that interesting idea that you said about the seamlessness that Karl was seeking in the collection, which I think...
Yeah, it was seamless couture. And couture means seam in French, which is, you know, there were no seams that you could see. So the construction of the dress was about the cutting and the draping or the hanging.
Which in a sense, I think as well, becomes when there is a seam, the seam has to have meaning rather than, and it wasn't Chanel, but it was Dior who said the best cut dress is the dress with the fewest cuts. That idea of doing everything with the fabric, which I think is very much what this was about, using the fabric, using the neoprene to mold the shapes rather than cutting, seaming, steaming.
Yeah, I mean, seaming has its virtue, a bit like syntax in sentences, that commas and exclamation marks and semicolons and all that can actually help meaning, but actually simple words best speak. So actually when you have a dress that isn't covered with lots of cuts and seams, maybe its volume is, I don't know,
more eloquent.
More eloquent.
No, we're done with that one.